think I'll just start to walk us through kind of how this is going to work, and then we'll go from there and we'll start into it. And if people join, they can join.
All
Okay,
right.
so yeah, so hello everyone and welcome to our first ArtEvolve weekly webinar series webinar. I'm very excited to introduce this to all of you. And of course, our first week's topic is going to be the art supply chain during COVID-19, which is of interest to many of us. And with our special guest here, Adam Fields, CEO and founder of ARTA. So, hi, Adam. Thank you for joining. We also have some of our team members here from ArtaCheck. Me, Mackenzie, I think it says my name is hello at ArtaCheck, so my name is actually Mackenzie. And I'm the head of digital marketing here. And then we have Chris. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chris Primrose. Speaking to you from Ireland today, so hello.
And Stacey.
Hello, I'm Stacey, and I'm from sunny Devon. So yeah, that's it pretty much. Nothing exciting going on in Devon today.
Chris and Stacey both do business development here at ArtaCheck. And Annika, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Annika. I'm the founder and CEO of ArtaCheck. I think there's some familiar faces in the audience and a few new ones, so nice to see you all.
Yeah. So today what we're going to be doing is just having a conversation around the art supply chain during this period. We're going to talk a little bit about the shipping situation, how art businesses can continue during this period, what modifications and changes they can make to go forward successfully. And then, of course, we're also going to be taking questions at the end. So if at any point in time you actually have a question, okay, you can go into the Q&A section, which is in that menu bar, and you can put in actually your question for that section, okay? So if something comes to mind while we're talking about a certain topic, you're more than welcome to pop in the question into the Q&A section. And then everyone else, just so you know, you can actually vote on questions that you'd like to see the answers to, okay? So you can upvote the questions, and then at the end, we'll go from the top of the list to the bottom, so the most upvoted questions all the way down with whatever time we have available to us. So I think what we're going to start with is actually, Adam, will you introduce yourself just a little bit more and tell us about your background and a little bit about ARTA?
Yeah, definitely. So ARTA is technically a 3PL, third-party logistics provider. We make it easy to buy, sell, and ship items requiring white glove logistics and services. So we have an online platform and an API that can enable companies around the world to expand their e-commerce capabilities and create operational efficiencies. Primarily focused on trying to bring collectible items, art, furniture, antiques, jewelry online, and kind of view the shipping not having equivalents to FedEx to get automatic rates, to showcase where you can sell, who you can sell, what you can sell to people as being a huge inhibitor. So work with a lot of galleries, auction houses, e-commerce platforms across 70 countries to hopefully make this a reality.
Awesome. And I think the reason why you founded ARTA is pretty interesting, particularly to the supply chain discussion. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I previously ran a company called artspace.com, which was in the early stages of kind of the art e-commerce intersection. We were trying to bring middle market artworks online from galleries, museums, nonprofits, really focused on trying to make art accessible to a broader audience. We noticed the biggest problem we had was essentially, putting an image on a web page with a buy button with, information isn't really an issue anymore, which is why I kind of think all these galleries having the viewing rooms is kind of interesting, to say the least. But the hardest problem was really transacting and then dealing with shipping and fulfillment. Most people, you're buying stuff, let's say under $50,000, whether it's a few $100s or a few $1,000s, aren't going to want to transact or opt into to buying something if they don't know what it costs to ship. We had a lot of challenges in doing that on our own at ArtSpace, and I figured there had to be a way to access pricing for these higher end movements. And we started talking to a lot of our customers. We were doing stuff with David Zwirner and the Whitney Museum, and whenever we had to ship something that we couldn't FedEx, they all said, talk to these companies and those companies. And as I investigated the space more, I recognized that there are a lot of amazing specialized logistics providers out there, but there really isn't a unified way to connect them to get rates and deal with shipping. So we started. That was kind of the catalyst for me in starting ARTA about 4 or 5 years ago.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's everyone, starts with a pain point, particularly when you're coming up with kind of innovative solutions. So I think that's great that your pain point also came from the art world, right? So why don't we dive in and talk a little bit about the current shipping situation and what you know and what you can share with our attendees.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a difficult time for just society in general. I think everyone is dealing with a lot of uncertainty, whether am I going to continue to have my job? Is my health okay? Are my grandparents, my parents, going to stay inside and be careful? So, obviously don't want to overlook that. If you're looking more at things through a business lens, I think it's interesting to kind of dissect what's happening right now. And from our standpoint, there are still ways to get items around the world, whether that's within the United States, within Europe, within Asia. Obviously, one of the benefits of being a third-party logistics provider is that there are a lot of great companies that can help maintain coverage out there. There are also the parcel providers such as FedEx, UPS, and DHL that are fully operational. So there are definitely certain areas and regions and jurisdictions that are on pretty tight lockdown. There are a lot of vendors that are not working, though we are moving things on a daily basis by road, by air. There are just some certain things to consider. I think the bigger problems we're seeing is that obviously things need to be released and received by people. So if you're dealing with a warehouse that is closed or a gallery that is closed, it's tougher to get things picked up and delivered. We're also seeing a lot less on the services side. Obviously people would much rather have stuff, dropped off in their garage or on their doorstep versus being brought inside to be unpacked and installed. So, definitely things to consider. We know that a lot of the shipping partners and vendors are taking a lot of care in terms of, wearing protective gear, disinfecting themselves and the items that they're moving. So, I would say if there's things that you don't need moved urgently. We're seeing a lot of less people needing a painting tomorrow for a dinner party, obviously, but there definitely are still ways to get art and specialized objects moved, whether it's domestically, regionally, or internationally.
That's great. I mean, I think that's probably heartening to hear for a lot of people that are on the call. The media tends to go for the bad news first, right? So that holds true across all different media, including art media. But I really, really enjoyed actually the shipping partner survey that you guys put out at the end of March. Would you mind speaking a little bit to that and what you guys did and what you found out?
Yeah, so we work with about 450 providers across the world, on a local, regional, national, and international basis. So we have a pretty interesting purview into how things operate, and at the same time work very closely with a lot of people that are actually on this webinar right now. So, we're trying to ultimately do what we can to help the ecosystem as much as possible. Part of that is disseminating information and providing some transparency into what's happening. And, we sent out a survey to our network of vendors and then had some interesting responses. I don't know if we want to maybe drop that into the chat so people can check it out. But, we're just trying to get a sense of what's happening, what's going on. And then the question that everyone has is, can we ship, can you not ship? And again, it's not on us to say what you can or can't do. That's either up to governments or individual business owners, but there are plenty of people that are still operating, and they've definitely changed the way that they have or are operating. But at the same time, as we said before, there are still ways to get things moving around, and if you can wait, you probably should, just for kind of helping out society. But it was super interesting to kind of get a sense of people. I think the important thing to understand is that it doesn't matter who you are. If you're a shipping company, you're a gallery, you're a museum, these are unprecedented times. People are trying to react and recalibrate their strategies very quickly. And I think we're starting to see initially, people didn't really know what to do. And I think now we're starting to see a lot of innovative solutions for how people are trying to continue to operate if they can within these uncertain times.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of kind of the word that's buzzing around is that the shipping companies, a lot of them are closed on different, parts of the supply chain. But something that one of the first things that you found was that actually 93% of them are still giving quotes, right?
Well, yeah,
So,
I mean, when it comes to quoting, well, a couple of things, just a bit of a shameless plug, but we rolled out,
yeah.
instant pricing and instant quoting that is done automatically. Again, not for everything. If you have a huge Richard Serra sculpture, can't get an instant price for that. But if you have, paintings, photography, smaller sculptures, we can get instant pricing for that. Totally, that's totally automated. So we've always had the ability to do that. But obviously, shipping companies too, they're still working from home. They're still have the ability to price things. So you can definitely get pricing from something even if you can't ship it for another couple months. And obviously, because some companies are closed and there is still a bit of uncertainty, a lot of the dates and turnarounds for this stuff are still to be determined. But for simple budgeting or pricing purposes, you can definitely still get pricing for most anything. When it comes to air freight, some of that pricing has gone up pretty exponentially. There's a lot less. There's just a lot less, capacity for a lot of these companies on the air freight side because a lot of their planes have been shut down. But you can still get pricing for most everything, I would say.
Okay, that makes sense. And then also, that a good percentage of the warehouses, right, were open for business and for release and receive in. So what do you think that means? I mean, going forward in terms of kind of how art can move around.
I think the warehousing part of it is the most difficult. Again, I think individual companies are making their own business decisions on whether they're open or closed, and how if they're operating on a skeleton staff or just not at all. The biggest issue that we're seeing is obviously warehouse a lot of art, surprisingly, and if there aren't people there to release or receive the items, then obviously you can't transport them no matter what. So I think that's the biggest issue we're seeing in the ecosystem today, is that a lot of these warehouses are either closed or really on a major skeleton crew. So things that might need a lot of condition reporting or packing are going to be a little bit more difficult to deal with. And the good news is that it's safe inside the warehouse. The bad news is that it's a bit more difficult to get anything done if they're not operational.
In a timely manner, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, but I mean, in that case, then you're probably looking at maybe going more local. Does that local deliveries and staying within country? Is that more active, do you think?
From a delivery standpoint, it's not limited just to local. I mean, we're still moving stuff in and out of China, in and out of Europe, in the United States. If people have the capacity to do work and are operating, within the realm of the law, then there is no shortage. Or there is no limit, I would say, on what you can do. Again, if you're shipping something from New York to Milan, you might not be able to get that final delivery there. And there's some areas that are much more under tighter quarantine than others. But if there are areas that FedEx can get to, for the most part, specialized logistics providers can get to also. A lot of it obviously is just done in a very careful manner. So if people aren't comfortable, things aren't going to happen. But we're seeing a lot of instances where people are getting things, collected and packed and waiting for air freight capacity to go down, or starting to shift towards parcel. Again, not everything you'd want to go through like a FedEx or UPS supply chain. If it is packed appropriately and maybe a lower value that's not as fragile, we're seeing a lot of people starting to opt for that.
Interesting.
You can't really, there's not a one size fits all situation. So if you have a very expensive fragile item, I would suggest you might want to wait for that. But we're seeing a lot of movements that are focused more on items that I would say are on about $50,000 and under, particularly in the couple $1,000s and under. And a lot of that stuff lends itself well either to parcel supply chains or maybe even furniture and household goods supply chains as well. Definitely a lot lower price points, and as I'm sure a lot of the galleries too are probably selling a lot lower price points too, unfortunately.
Sure. Well, it sounds like.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Annika.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you're saying it's a demand issue at the moment, pretty much exclusively. Is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at first it was a demand issue and a supposed lack of supply issue. And I think now that people are starting to recognize that there is the ability, and I mean supply from a logistics standpoint, now that there is the ability to move certain items, we're starting to see that uptick a little bit. I kind of see the first stage of this whole crisis is in being just a kind of some shock and awe, and people saying, oh no, what am I going to do for good reason? Am I going to have my job? Is my business going to survive? And I think there's been a little bit of a recalibration for people in terms of, all right, this is the reality of the situation. What can we do to kind of move past it? And I think now that that's kind of happened, you've seen, a lot of galleries spin up viewing rooms, try to adapt, White Cube Gallery, trying to sell more editions instead of, huge installations. There's some innovative solutions that I think are coming out of this unfortunate situation. And I think we're starting to see some things come back to normal in terms of some people buying and selling. With that said, yes, I would imagine that there is a lot less demand due to the economic situation of things. So we're not going to see levels that we saw pre-pandemic, particularly because I think it was a pretty big bull market for everything that was going on. But I think things are starting to kind of equalize a little bit now that people recognize that you can move things around. And I think there's a lot more being centered towards the lower end of the market.
And so you mentioned that air freight had gone up quite a bit because of the lack of planes really going up. What about sea freight?
Well, air freight has gone down. Has gone up for a couple of reasons. Well, some of which is that some of the ports were literally closed down. Obviously, what a lot of people don't always recognize is that there's both air freight from a cargo perspective and air freight from a passenger perspective. And anytime you're on an airplane, whether it's American Airlines, British Airways, United Airlines, you're sitting on top, but there's a lot of cargo down below that. So the majority of revenue for airlines comes from transporting cargo on a commercial airliner. So because there's a lot less commercial airlines in the air, that is going to drastically limit the amount of cargo space that's available. Now, a lot of the commercial airliners have switched their airlines to cargo. So they've taken out seats, and you're starting to see some capacity increase there. Then on the cargo side, there are just some companies that run strictly cargo, no passengers at all, who are still up and running. The sea freight side is a bit interesting as well. Important to note that generally sea freight takes a lot longer. So if you're shipping stuff that you are in a rush for, sea freight is definitely not the way to go, though it can be a lot cheaper. Sea freight is starting to pick up a little bit as well, but a lot of these supply chains are very backed up. And I think when you're looking at the fact that a lot of this stuff comes out of China, not necessarily art, just a lot of whether it's protective equipment, widgets and stuff for consumer products, a lot of it is devoted towards that.
Yeah, that would make sense. Okay, great. So let's see, I think maybe now we'll kind of move into talking a little bit about how the art industry can continue business during this period, now that we know that people can ship and globally, just good news. But first I'd actually like to pop up a quick poll. And let me see if I can get this rolling. Launch poll. Let's see. So if everyone wants to take a look at the poll that's just popped up, it's actually, are you open for business, right? So we want to make sure that this conversation is tailored to everybody who's in the room. And so we're really curious to know, are you closed right now? Are you going to stay closed? Are you working to open again? Are you completely open? Are you starting to run things online, right? So there's a lot of different kind of stages that people might be at right now. So let's take a look at what kind of different organizations are doing.
I also have a question about disinfecting. I was in a webinar that the Shipping Monster was running last week, and one of the questions that came up a lot with the US museums was around efforts to disinfect things from a museum perspective. Have you heard anything about that, Adam?
Yeah, a little bit. And again, I'll preface it by saying that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert at the matter, so definitely don't take what I say overly seriously. But I know that Jonathan Schwartz from Atelier 4 has had some comments on the issue, and essentially what is inside a crate or a packaging seems to be pretty safe from anything COVID related. People are recommending that you do swipe down the outside of packaging, with a disinfectant wipe, just to be safe. I can't speak to, if there is actual scientific evidence of COVID, lasting longer than a couple hours or days on, crate, plywood, plastic packaging, or whatnot. But I think, with anything we do, whether it's, going to the grocery store or receiving in a crate, probably better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm doing at home is I have a little quarantine, procedure where things just stay in their packaging for, if possible, a week. That's what I've been doing personally. So I guess it would probably be good practice for people to operate with that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, one of the problems is just that there's still so much unknown and there's a lot of uncertainty, and I don't think there's always a right answer for a lot of this stuff. And I think that's why people are trying to make, informed decisions or, to the best of their ability. And I think that's why these things are so difficult to get through, because you can't really say for certain you need to do this or you should do that. We're seeing a lot of that in the United States, just in terms of, first they said, don't wear a mask. Now they're saying wear a mask. And I think, doesn't matter what you're doing. There's a lot of information that's all over the place.
Well, I've seen a lot of reports that vary quite drastically on how long the virus can remain on different kinds of materials. In that webinar last week, I heard something I had not heard before, which was somebody said 17 days. And I mean, to me, that sounds like a really long time. And I haven't seen any report that says that either, but I have seen reports that say up to 7 days, maybe, just to be safe, but probably it's long dead by then. So I think it is one of those things where we have to just in terms of risk reduction, we have to decide what risks are sensible from our point of view. I have heard that it stays wooden and cardboard surfaces are less likely for the virus to survive on, and plastic and metal and glass surfaces are more likely. So I think that's maybe a good point.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, and then let's see in the comments, I think it's Margaret. I'm getting this right? Yeah. She says that the recommendation she's heard is that 9 days for artifacts. So left in packaging and crating.
And I see a suggestion to take a poll to see how many museums are receiving objects at this time. I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, that's a good question. Can I make another poll?
Yeah, I think what I've
I
seen
may not be able to.
I think a lot of museums are on skeleton staffs, and I think they have security and all that. But I think unfortunately a lot have either furloughed people or they're working from home. I would guess that most museums are not receiving items, but doing a poll I think would be pretty informative on that.
Yeah, so let's see. I made this poll beforehand. Let me just share the results of this first one. So who is open for business? It looks like our winner is actually people who are open and running their business online, which I think is fantastic. Very happy to hear that. And then next is closed for the duration of COVID-19, but perhaps after a couple of these webinars, that won't be true anymore. And then, you know, we have some other options, right? So people who are kind of in between and somewhere in the in between in those steps. So yeah, thank you for everyone for responding. That's actually really interesting information. Okay, let's see. I don't think I can whip up a poll that quickly in order to do it for another one, because I had to make that one before we got on the webinar. I'm not sure it will allow me to make another one, but Paul, I see you, and I think it's a fantastic idea, and maybe we can do something like a survey or incorporate it into another webinar. So I will keep note of that. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so now that we kind of know where a lot of people are sitting, it seems like they're on one side of the spectrum or the other in terms of being open or not open at all. What do you think about, you know, how the art industry can continue doing business during this period?
I mean, I think in my mind, again, not trying to say that there's not some super tragic and you know, horrible things happening right now, but I think, you know, this time also raises some interesting questions to talk through, and I think that's one of them. And from my standpoint, from our standpoint, I think, you know, there's always been a huge push to try to bring this industry online and add, you know, digital tools, technology, automation to it. I, for my part, have been trying to do that for the last 10 years between ArtSpace and now with ARTA. So I think ultimately, you know, really, you know, tragic times and hard times lead to a lot of innovation. And I think we're starting to see that. So my hope is that this will ultimately help move and accelerate the tailwind that is digitization technology, particularly on the e-commerce side. You know, I think that we've seen, if you look at all the galleries that have started to spin up viewing rooms, you look at, you know, Art Basel and Frieze starting to put together these remote fairs. I think we're seeing a ton of incoming for our product as we roll it out. We're rolling out our API with live auctioneers and a bunch of the big auction houses in the next couple months, because people are trying to bring a lot of their sales and transactional activities online. Again, you know, you're not always going to be selling $1 million pieces, huge sculptures online, but what we've seen and what I've seen over the years is that items that are more in the middle market, prints, editions, paintings, you know, photography, stuff that might be a little bit easier to digest, I think always has a place for automation and e-commerce. So we're starting to see a lot of people start to resort towards that. We're, for our part, of trying to really push people and help people spin up e-commerce storefronts, whether that's through their own infrastructure or, you know, with platforms that we work with like Live Auctioneers and Shopify and so on and so forth. So I'd like to think that there's a lot of opportunity in this time. Obviously, it's a change and a shift, but I think that we'll see a lot of kind of shifts in strategy, even once the world does get back to normal, which it will, in terms of how people are approaching transacting and selling and ultimately engaging with art, you know, just in general.
Yeah. So Amy says, I think that's true, Adam. Our museum is pursuing online initiatives like never before. It's hard for us, but pushing us in new ways.
Yeah, I think the you know, the museum and nonprofit space is interesting, and I think, you know, the unfortunate part of it is that the amount of, you know, funding and just support that they're receiving is obviously going south in a big way, which is tragic because museums and nonprofits need that support. But I think you're seeing some super interesting, you know, kind of initiatives on the museum side too, whether it's kind of the you know, VR ability to tour exhibitions. You're seeing actually I don't know if it's robots is the right word, but you know, kind of remote viewing mechanisms to actually tour exhibitions. I think the tools available to engage with a lot of these exhibitions remotely, particularly on the museum side, has ramped up a lot. So I think there's never been more kind of free tools for people that want to engage with the arts to access this kind of information. So I'm hoping people take advantage of that. With that said, it doesn't really address the ability to support, you know, these types of institutions.
Yeah. well, maybe we have to kind of change our perspective on the value of seeing things from a from VR rather than seeing them live, and
Yeah, you look,
kind
I
of
think
valuing that VR experience.
I think it's the same thing with buying stuff online. You know, it's not, these things are all compliments. No one's saying that you should never go to an exhibition again or that you should only buy things online. But I think technology and these kind of innovations can be an amazing kind of complement to the existing ways that people are doing things. And I think that's what we're really seeing now, is that those kind of digital complements, I think people are starting to become a bit more open to and started to accelerate into the world, which is nice.
Yeah, definitely. So Rachel says, suddenly I now have time for looking into all these new online options, which I think is true for a lot of organizations, right? You're kind of forced to look into all these things now. Yeah. And then Marta says, the things that we deal with are physical objects. The sales, exhibitions, etc. can be online, digital platforms, but once it's sold, it is a solid object, which Marta is right in the end, until we totally go into the world of digital art in the 22nd century. I'll have to wait a little while to get there. But yeah, I mean, I think what you were saying before, Adam, about middle market and how that's kind of actually being able to expand on the internet. I mean, just from an internet perspective, right? Digital marketing perspective, you know, the internet is the great equalizer in terms of allowing people access. So in that sense, we may actually see an expansion of that middle market.
Well, I think not only will it expand the middle market, but I think it's expanding, you know, the next generation of kind of connoisseurs, collectors, appreciators to get involved. You know, when we started ArtSpace a couple of years ago, you know, we essentially built that business all off of, you know, prints and editions. The ability to buy, you know, a print in edition for, you know, a couple $100 to a couple $1,000, you know, is a really good on-ramp, an access point for people. We see that if there are, you know, known recognized artists or known recognized sellers that have the ability to sell things, let's say under $10,000, there's a big market for that. And I think that's, as you said, it lends itself much more easily to online. Obviously, it still has its holes in terms of the type of, you know, items or mediums that you can really feel comfortable with. But I think, again, you have to start somewhere. And I think if people can start to say, all right, you know, we want to bring this segment of our business online, whether it's, you know, a museum or nonprofit that has inventory and a gift shop. I mean, a lot of what we built ArtSpace off of was working with museums and nonprofits to help them bring their prints and editions and charitable items online. Because a lot of people don't recognize too that a lot of museums and nonprofits either, you know, will do a benefit print, a benefit edition, or have excess inventory that they use to raise money, and it's a lot of really great stuff, but it really doesn't see the light of day. So I think that museums and nonprofits trying to highlight, you know, the editions and inventory that they have would be super, you know, important in a time like this. And then hopefully commercial entities like galleries can start to dabble in e-commerce with items that kind of lend themselves best towards that medium.
I've been interested for a while in looking at a tool for museums that helps them do crowdfunding, where especially for conservation and collection care projects, where they provide as you know, kind of like a Kickstarter campaign, where you give one of those prints that you're talking about from the gift shop as one of the kind of, you know, prizes for donating a certain level. And you can see the little, you know, line of how much the donation has received. So I think, you know, things like that, I imagine will hopefully there'll be some innovative ideas to help museums find creative ways of fundraising too.
Yeah, definitely. So we know we've kind of been talking about technology on the front end, but obviously you work mostly on the back end in the 3PL space. So what about technology there? I mean, what can businesses be doing on the logistics side right now to sort of bring that into digital as much as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's just on the logistics side. I think it's, you know, similar to what you guys are doing too. And my view is that there's never been as many amazing kind of off-the-shelf tools that people can tap into. And I think, you know, we live in a world that, you know, can make people so much more efficient with their time and resources, and people should have an open mind to try and to experiment with some of that. You know, I can't say I've been I've done too many condition reports in my day, but I can imagine doing something, on an iPad probably is easier and better than doing something, on a piece of paper, particularly if you're thinking about how we can store it and how we can share it and transmit it. So I think the problem that everyone faces is that, this is an industry that's been around for a very long time. There's a lot of really, smart and specialized, companies and professionals that do a great job and take a lot of care in their work. So how do you kind of meld those two together and say, all right, this is an industry that's been around for a couple hundred years. And the way we've done things is great, and we should continue to do that. But how can we, again, going back to the word of complement, how can we complement what we are doing with maybe some different tools and resources that can make things better? And I think the thing that people need to recognize is that it's not just about them. There's always a couple people involved, whether it's a client and a vendor or a client and another service. So I think people need to keep in mind that just because something works for you, there might be other options to make a better client experience for a buyer or a vendor. And I think that's the thing that we're trying to push to people is that, from a shipping perspective, we work with a lot of our shippers to ultimately optimize their internal resources. We've been able to automate quoting, which means that the business that we're giving our shipping partners is much more efficient. They have to quote on less jobs. It's more them being able to accept and fulfill a job. So now their quoting team it can be much more focused on executing shipments versus and needlessly quoting on things that never get booked. So there's a lot of ways to kind of improve the efficacy of things. I think the difficult part is some of the, I guess, inertia will say that the resistance to kind of trying new things. And I'm hoping that as the times start to change, people will be a bit more open to engaging. And I think, whether it's ArtEcheck or ARTA, we're here to, and I don't want to speak for ArtEcheck, but I assume it's similar. We're here to respect the work that's been done from businesses that have been, in this space for a very long time, but are hoping for open-mindedness to see how we can work together and hopefully move this entire ecosystem forward.
Absolutely. In agreement with you there, Adam.
Yeah. What was the report that you were talking about? We were actually talking about this earlier today, Annika, right? Where you were saying that one of the big blocks to buying art online was actually the condition of it, right? What was that report you were telling me about?
The Hiscox online art market report. They have been finding for like 5 or 6 years in a row. They interview about 600 collectors, and overwhelmingly the top reason every year for a hesitancy to purchase online is a lack of physical inspection and concern over condition. So more and more people are using ArtEcheck or condition reports in general as a kind of pre-sales tool for inquiries about condition to confirm that something is in good condition.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I mean, one of the things that we've been trying to push people towards is more of a, person to person, consignor to consignor type of model, which I think, people have tried and is starting to pick up some traction. But as some of the larger auction houses, their concern has been the condition side of things and feel that they need to, take control of inventory to have just more sense of ownership over it. And I think condition is one of those things, which is why I do feel like a tool like ArtEcheck could help break down those barriers to make people feel more comfortable in not necessarily taking on consignment of an item. If you're taking on consignment of an item, there's higher cost, there's higher environmental impact. There's a lot of issues that it leads to. So if you can just deal with it directly from the source to the source, I think there's a lot of efficiencies to gain there.
Yeah, so Marta said that we all need to decelerate. In the art world, everything is urgent. If museums, institutions, collectors agree on receiving works not instantly, with more planning, we can still be working.
I like that.
That's very wise. That's very wise, Marta.
I think
Yes.
I think it's very true that there is a lot of drama and a lot of a sense of urgency that is not, let's face it, always necessary. Adam, you mentioned the dinner party example earlier. I think that's a great one that I've personally
I can't tell you how many times we get stuff. We need this delivered yesterday because we had an important dinner party, which we're happy to try to accommodate. But once people find out that it might be a little bit more expensive, they change their tune. But yeah, definitely seeing a lot less of that right now.
Well, good.
Yeah,
with
David
that
says,
aspect.
yeah, David says, hashtag amen. Nice, David. So we're actually gonna, urgency is what we do, but a dose of healthy perspective, much appreciated. Yeah, yeah. So we're actually going to pop into our Q&A section in just a minute, but I would love, Adam, if you would share just a little bit more about your API that you mentioned earlier. I'm gonna pop a link into the chat so that everybody can kind of see it, and if you'd like to explore it later on, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, so API, literally stands for Application Program Interface. It sounds super techy, but everyone deals with APIs on a daily basis. If anyone has ever shared something, from the New York Times or the BBC to Facebook, that is a connectivity API between those two entities. So what we've really done is rolled up all the complexities of white glove logistics into an API so that online sellers can access pricing both pre-purchase, during purchase, and ultimately after purchase. So we're rolling that out in June with liveauctioneers.com to help e-commerce enable all of their auction houses around the United States and Europe, which we're really excited about, and are working with a lot of other entities to get that going out soon. Ultimately,
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it didn't happen overnight. It's quite difficult. But ultimately, if people don't know what something costs to ship, the likelihood of them entering into a sale or transaction is much more difficult. But also for galleries, just these entire transactions are super fragmented. It goes from, I'll take it to great, you get an invoice a couple of days later, a week later, you get the payment, then it's how you want to do a shipping. So the entire transaction from I'll take it to I have it can be months. So, particularly for New York sellers that have to deal with the sales tax issues, if you can, combine the price of an item with the shipping and get it all done within one transaction, it can make things just a lot easier for everyone involved and ultimately save a lot of time, energy, and resources for people. So we're really excited about it.
I think an important point that might be useful from us as, techie company CEOs is that one of the, not just within the art world, but like much more broadly, one of the things that really sours online sales generally is just like the number of clicks and having to click away from, the ecosystem that you're in, right? So anytime you have to, you're trying to buy something, but now you have to go somewhere else to figure out the shipping or, whatever it may be, the insurance or what have you, any aspect of it, anything that can take you even for a moment away from that sales process online is probably going to mean that you get that drop off,
Yeah, it's path of least resistance. And if you can create
Exactly.
less friction, that's ultimately the name of the game. People have no problem putting something in their cart for a couple $1,000s and purchasing it. But we see a lot of these auction houses that deal with shipping post-purchase, they'll actually lose a lot of their sales because people then find out how much shipping does cost. And they say, that's crazy. I would never have done that if I didn't know how much it costs. So if you can get this information out up front, and that goes the same for duties and taxes and VAT also, getting as much information to the surface as possible can allow people to make more informed decisions and ultimately, get rid of some of these unfortunate situations that can happen after someone thinks that they've sold something or that they bought something.
Yeah, that actually happened when I was subscribing to a tech product the other day. It gave me the price and then the invoice came into my email inbox and it said plus 20% VAT. It's like, I'm gonna cancel this now. Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing that with us. If people are interested in, I know your API isn't live yet, but if people are interested in like getting in contact with you or learning more about it, they can go to that link. And
yeah, you can go
is
to
there
the
any
link.
way they can?
You can email us. We're talking to a lot of galleries that are spinning up these viewing rooms and also, launching their own kind of e-commerce initiatives, which is exciting as well.
Cool, thanks. And then the other link I'd just like to share, this is actually something I thought of doing. So also on their website, on the ARTA website, they have the shipping partners application, right, Adam? So
Yes.
for any shippers in the room, just put
Yes,
that up there. So if you'd like it.
We are a 3PL. We're only as good as our partners that have assets and are carrying out some of these services for us. We work with many, but we want to work with more. Many of people on this chat we already do work with, but others that we don't, please fill that out, and we'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Susan said online listen again. Yes, it will be online. I'll share the video tomorrow to everyone who attended. And then we have a bunch of questions that came in and just popped them. Let's see. Joanna from MTech says they are facilitating international shipments at the moment. Asia, some US, Swiss truck. So some UK fine arts agents are open and functioning. That's great. And Joanna from Momart, operating reduced staff, but available to discuss projects. So operational services may need to be postponed depending on location, local regulations and nature of project. Thanks. Thank you everyone for contributing. It's really helpful. Clarenza, you were a bit late. You said that, did you discuss social distance and art handling activities? A little bit, but if you'd like to ask a specific question, please feel free to pop it into the Q&A, which we'll now jump into.
Well, this is something that we have discussed before internally about art handling, you know, just the practicalities of art social distancing whilst art handling, because it's generally only smaller stuff that can be handled by one person. This is something that Chris brought up in an internal meeting the other week. Do you remember, Chris? So
Yes. Sorry, carry on. I was muted.
That's all right. So but this is something that we have thought about and brought up, but we don't really have a great answer for, other than, you know, you have to limit yourself to things that one person can comfortably handle, or to, you know, in order to keep up the social distancing of 6 feet it is here in the UK. I don't know if that particular measurement differs, you know, internationally, but here in the UK, it's 6 feet. And so I think that is problematic from an art handling point of view. I don't know if you can speak more to that, Chris or Adam.
Well, just from experience over the years, loading trucks, you know, if you're, or offloading trucks, you can have maybe 4 technicians in the back of a truck, and you might need a 2-man lift, even a 3-man lift or 4-man lift. So it's, how do you keep that distance? Because you're very close. Obviously you could have one inside the truck and then one operating the forklift. But again, it's, yeah, it's obviously a problem to be solved.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing, to your point, I think a lot of people are resorting to one, just a single, you know, technician when they can. Yeah.
But if it's a big crate, how do you?
Exactly.
You know?
So that's probably why White Cube has been doing the prints, as you mentioned, Adam. It's good thinking.
Yeah, it's tough to kind of get a, you know, Gormley installation, you know, going everywhere. But yeah, again, I mean, I think, you know, as I said before, not everything's meant for online. Not everything's meant to be moved around in this day and age, in this, you know, pandemic. So I think we're seeing a lot of stuff on the smaller, less fragile, you know, less expensive side that can be handled by, you know, a person that is already packed, that is less complicated, for obvious reasons.
That makes good sense.
Yeah. Okay, so our first question here, while there are a lot of unknowns at the moment, what is realistic in terms of planning art moves and exhibitions later this year? Is there any anticipation that suppliers will be rebuilding staff and services by autumn?
I think the short answer is no one knows anything, because there is a lot of uncertainty. I think you know, I'm trying to be optimistic just for society, independent of business, that it seems like we're starting to turn the corner on things. I think, you know, I'm a sports guy. It seems like they're trying to get sports up, but without spectators. And I think that could be similar to how we're seeing things in this ecosystem too. There might be, you know, new exhibitions, but not necessarily, you know, with the same attendance that we had previously. It seems like, you know, the infrastructure side of it is slowly but surely getting back up in terms of moving things around. And, you know, hopefully kind of once these economies recover, people can come out of furlough and get their jobs back and get back to normal. I would say on the commercial side, I would probably expect a lot less, 6 and 7 figure purchases and more in, the middle market and lower end market that is gonna happen. I would like to think that in the fall, things will start to kind of come back to normal. I know Germany is starting to kind of slowly come out of their quarantine stuff, I think next week, which is great news, and hopefully it can stick.
In Austria too, I heard that the garden design centers have reopened.
Yeah, I don't think the U.S. is setting the example of how to handle these kind of things, and I think some of our European friends, I think, are doing a better job, politics aside, of course.
Sure. Well, from everyone I've spoken to, I've spoken with quite a few people internationally, and I've heard people say in America that they're working towards a kind of 4th of July date as a time when things might get back up and running, and then a lot of other people are saying September. So I think that those are the two kind of dates that I've heard thrown around the most. And I have also, I believe that, as we were saying earlier, a lot of the issue is demand. So I think when the jobs are there, the shippers will be there to respond to the jobs, and they, I'm sure, will be figuring out practical solutions to how they can support more than a skeleton staff from a safety point of view. I think right now the reason for the skeleton staff is essentially because the work isn't there.
So next question is from David, and he says, how are businesses in this space operating within the essential services only mandate? How is industry leadership working with local officials to navigate the situation? Do you have anything?
Yeah,
do you know anything about that?
I think logistics is kind of a gray area for that. I think the whole idea of what is essential is a bit of a gray area. I think, if you look at, is art essential for this world? I think the answer would be no. But I think logistics and kind of the part that logistics plays in it is an edge case. I think a lot, particularly on the legal side, household items and household goods, I think are exempt from the mandate. So I think it's just trying to find edge cases where you can. Again, there's plenty of people ordering stuff from Amazon that are not essential services, and a lot of that is being carried out by parcel providers. And then there are a lot of logistics companies that are dealing with some super important movements, whether it's for medical equipment, PPE, vaccines and medications. I think it's about just trying to do with what you can, but at the same time, people are trying to survive and keep their businesses and employees afloat. And it's not for me to say morally this is right, morally this is wrong. I think it's really hard for people right now, and particularly putting people in a situation that you don't really know. So I think we only can really do what we each think is right, and hopefully things get better for everybody.
And in terms of risk and reducing risk, something that came up in the webinar last week was around couriers and the wish to reduce the need for couriers in the next 6 to 12 months and staff traveling, and whether it's fair to ask people to travel for work basically internationally. And I know that some other industries have kind of published the sentiment that they won't be asking staff to travel internationally for kind of ethical risk reasons. And so we were talking about how a good way to kind of mitigate that risk and reduce the need for courier travel is increased digital documentation and the ability to kind of deal with courier activities remotely. And in response to that, last week we've been talking about internally and thinking about adding a feature or an add-on tool or something in order to allow people to take video, to shippers or a local freelance person, in order to allow kind of a remote courier thing to go on. So I think there's things like that we can also look on to reduce.
Yeah, look, just the innovation that will come out of this difficult time, I think, is going to be amazing. And I think it's stuff like that is going to hopefully take shape and help push things forward.
definitely. So let's see, Gabriela says, I think we actually just talked about this. Have your logistics partners implemented new safety measures for truck drivers or art handlers, right? So you mentioned that they are trying to use less text.
Yeah, we're seeing less text. We're seeing them, taking proper precautions in terms of how they're, sanitizing protective equipment that they're wearing. A lot less inside services like installation and unpacking. A lot of just leaving things, with it in the door, in the garage, trying to limit contact as much as possible. Again, there's not necessarily a perfect solution for all this stuff. I think people are trying to be creative and do what they can under the circumstances, but there's definitely a lot more flexibility in what people can get, and definitely a lot less interaction on some of these movements.
Yeah. Good. So Valerie says, let's see, you use a lot of gloves, masks, and other items classified as PPE, I'm guessing, for their regular operations. Do you think there'll be a long-term issue in getting these materials resupplied?
I mean, I think we're seeing, it's an issue all over the world. I think there is a bottleneck that was already an issue that seems to be addressed, and I think the volume for all this stuff is starting to get larger. I mean, I know, I can speak for ourselves in New York. It was difficult to get masks, not necessarily the N95 masks that were, are strictly for medical professionals, but just general, masks. And now, we're able to do that on our own. And I think that goes to the fact that this started in China, but now China and their supply chains are starting to come back to normal. So I think a lot of the supply shortages, if I can speak, were because of China being shut down. But now that they're coming back together, I would expect that the supply will follow suit. So I hope there are no more shortages, more so for the medical community than for anything else.
Well, I think a big thing too is that our, brothers and sisters in the fashion industry have actually jumped in on this hardcore across multiple countries. It started kind of in Italy, and then it, I think, really branched out to the US, where large garment factories are now being repurposed for PPE. So.
Wow, I hadn't heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, like large companies like Cristiano Siriano in New York, and then also here, like Dolce & Gabbana is doing it, and other large designers
making hand sanitizer. There's a lot of really great things happening. Even though the world is in a difficult place right now.
Yeah, so I'm sure we will all innovate across sectors, across borders and industries.
Absolutely, and it's a nice sense too of kind of community, and that we're reaching out, even albeit virtually, to help one another.
Yeah.
But I see a message from Scott about the thing I was just mentioning. Won't insurance companies need to be on board for virtual solutions for couriering? Yes, I think two important points for that is security and insurance. I am in touch with several brokers and insurers and loss adjusters. I'm in conversation with Munich Re, Hallett Independent, and Liberty Mutual, and a few others. And so I think we're actually going to have another webinar in our series devoted to insurance matters, and also on things like was raised in last week's webinar with the Shipping Monster about extending insurance premiums and contracts for museums that are, where their stuff is stuck, for example.
Yeah. So we're actually at the end of our hour already, but Adam, how would you feel about sticking around to answer a few more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, awesome. So let's see, we have, let's see, can you talk to the movement of art and the need to social distance going forward? What kinds of new steps are we going to need to incorporate to the business and to physically move the art, but keep ourselves and the art safe?
Yeah, I mean, I think, similar to what we talked about before, is that I think there are certain ways to kind of navigate what's happening currently. And then I think that, once this is all past us, there's probably going to be a lot of those that are going to stick. And I think it's going to take people a little bit longer to feel comfortable congregating in large crowds, whether that's in, a gallery opening or a museum exhibition. But I think generally, I hope that, people that are moving and interacting with, whether it's art or people, are going to be, wearing proper protective gear, gloves, masks, both to protect themselves, but also, a lot of the items that they're moving are super delicate and fragile, and you don't want to get germs or anything on it. So I think there's a lot of kind of practices we can take from this to hopefully parlay into dealing with stuff when the world gets back to normal.
I wonder if museums will change too. I mean, it's possible that a lot could stick in terms of changes with remote working. And, you know, for example, in ArtEcheck as a business, we all have flexible working. So if somebody wants to go to a museum or a gallery exhibition at, you know, a time when there's hardly anyone around, that's what we all usually do, because it's, you know, just a nicer viewing experience. And so maybe in the future, if more people are still, you know, having the ability to work remotely, there'll be more flexibility as well in terms of having more kind of timed admittance to things to enable social distancing more, I hope.
Yeah. So let's see, reagent estimates. So I guess these would be shipping estimates. These normally have a 3-month validity period. It would be good to know what concessions are being made on this. Will estimates be valid for longer?
That's a good question.
No, I think the opposite's true. I mean, we put out a notice for us that, you know, there are times where estimates are only good for an hour or a day or a week. There's a lot of kind of uncertainty, and part of it depends on the type of movement. I would say, particularly for air freight shipments where the rates are just fluctuating so rapidly, there's a much shorter time window on that could be down to 2 hours. For items that are kind of moving on road via groupage services, prices are pretty consistent. It's more about the dates, I would say. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of, you know, when people are running their groupage services, what areas they can hit. So I would say takeaways pricing for road and groupage, it would be pretty consistent and probably could be honored. It's more about the dates and changing around the dates. For items involving air freight, mostly international movements, I would say that the pricing fluctuation is going to make those quotes very limited, potentially even to a couple hours.
Wow. Makes sense though.
So do you think the cost of air freight, this is from Melissa, do you think the cost of air freight will continue to increase post-COVID?
I think it has less to do with COVID or not COVID. It really has to do with capacity. I think the thing to follow is really more of the commercial airline industry. Once the commercial airline industry is back and functioning more to the standards that they were before, I would say that will kind of start to normalize prices. But I think it's important to remember that independent of COVID, there are some very rapid increases in price. I mean, if you look at Art Basel, around Art Basel Miami, the prices out of Europe to get to Miami, sometimes there's not even any capacity. And a lot of that is because sometimes there's only cargo capability, and I think there's only about 3 cargo planes that go from London Heathrow to Miami International Airport a day. So it's definitely not just because of COVID. There's a lot of times where capacity increases and pricing increases as well. A lot of it depends on, you know, for super large items that only can ride on a cargo plane, there's much less cargo availability generally. And for things that can ride on a commercial airline, there's a lot more availability. So I would say that there generally will be increased availability once the commercial airliners get back, but that doesn't mean that there's never going to be issues before, because there always have been capacity issues.
Okay, and so from Sarah, for clarification, does ARTA act as a broker, or does ARTA provide packing and shipping services itself?
So we don't own any assets. We are a 3PL, which is another way to say we're a broker. So we partner with asset owners on a local, regional, and national basis, and are essentially the unifying technology layer between them, but we're also a freight forwarder. So if you're shipping something from New York to London, we have partners in New York that can collect it, they can pack it, they can crate it. We'll procure air freight with the airlines, which allows pricing to get much lower, but also maintain quality. And then on the other side, contract with someone in London to clear customs and make the final delivery. Because we're able to unify across our platform and have a consolidated resource to access, you know, geographies, different service levels, different item types, it creates a lot of economies of scale and efficiency gains for people on both sides of the network.
Great. Let's see. So how is everyone looking at fine art logistics after things open up again? It'll be a different thing from museums, galleries, and service providers.
So what is that? Just how is everyone going to be thinking about things once we're done?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we're
I
guessing
think,
a little bit. But.
I think everyone will be excited to get back to reality, you know, to the world before COVID, both just for their own sanity and their jobs and their businesses, just engaging and connecting with people and culture. I think, you know, there's going to be some implications from a logistics standpoint. The term is called a bullwhip effect. It's when supply chains go from 0 to 100 super fast. So I think there's going to be some short-term capacity issues once the world does get back up and running. But I think there's going to be people are going to be pretty excited to get back to normal, I hope.
It might be a little,
Yeah,
I would
definitely.
anticipate it could be a little chaotic in the kind of immediate aftermath of things opening back up. And so people need to try and, I guess, mitigate that by just being good about planning.
Yeah, I'm sure the pubs and the bars will be the most chaotic, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have so many questions coming in. I'm just gonna grab a couple more and then we'll kind of end at the 15-minute mark because, you know, we could keep going on. Thank you so much everyone for asking so many really good questions. So this is actually for Annika, ArtaCheck. Will ArtaCheck add a new icon for sanitized to the digital reports?
Ah, good idea. Sure, we can do that. I'll just
Yeah,
make
I
a
haven't
note.
thought about that, but that's kind
I
of cool.
love that.
That's a great idea. Can you make a note of that, Stacey?
I certainly will.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Okay, let's see. Okay, so Julia Betancourt actually is more of a statement, but she said that SIT Spain has put into place good COVID-19 protocol and are operating. So for other shippers out there looking for protocol examples, maybe that's somewhere to look. With recent quarantine restrictions announced in Canada, how is this affecting art movement from US into Canada?
That's a good question. We haven't really been doing much on that route. I know that they did close the borders. I would assume that I believe that, you know, freight is still moving between the borders. So my assumption would be that, assuming you have someone that can carry it, you know, between U.S. and Canada, that it shouldn't be a problem. But I'm not totally sure, as we haven't done that much on that route. And I know that there have been some border closures, at least for just regular, you know, people and crossings.
That came up in that webinar last week. There was a Canadian registrar, and I believe they said that the border was closed for art movement too.
I think we still have Total Fine Art on the line somewhere, so they might be able to answer that question for us.
I guess that the other answer too is that if the ground, if road is closed, then there's always air. There are still you know, whether it's a parcel provider or air freight would be working between those companies. Between those countries.
That's a good point. Did you see, Mackenzie, the one about our shipping companies actually laying off staff and at what percentages?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. So yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I fortunately for us in ARTA, we are fully intact and have been able to weather the storm. Which I feel, you know, really fortunate about. I do know that, you know, I mean, again, we don't own any assets in warehouses, so it's much different story for us. I do know that, you know, the shipping companies that have, you know, warehouses and trucks and people haven't been as fortunate as we are, which is really sad to hear. I know, you know, without naming specifics, that there have been people that have been furloughed or laid off. Obviously, I hate to hear it. It's the reality of the situation, and hoping that we can get past that and they can get rehired once we do get back to normal. But the whole kind of freelancing and gig economy side of it, I think is definitely one of the areas that's been hit the hardest. Whether it's the art handlers or the logistics technicians, it's difficult for sure.
Well, I know in the UK, I think in the US furloughing is unpaid from what I've heard. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's unpaid. I think sometimes you can keep your health insurance, which I think is sometimes yes, sometimes no. You essentially are just taking it's an unpaid leave essentially but you technically are still employed. You can look for another job. You can still you still have your job once things kind of get back to a normal state.
Well, just so everyone knows, in the UK, furloughing is paid by the government 80% of the wages of the staff, and so a lot of shippers are furloughing in the UK, but those staff will be paid 80% of their wages.
Same here in Italy.
Yeah, and I believe in Europe, in general, there's also a lot of furloughing going on of staff, but those staff are being paid their salaries, either through the government schemes, or in some cases I've heard of shippers that are furloughing but covering the cost themselves for those shippers that have some, more reserves than others.
Yeah. So why don't we wrap up with a question actually from the future generation of art logistics. It's actually a graduate student who's doing their MA in art logistics, and Veta wants to ask, with everything going on, should we be concerned for future employment? Do you think that the pandemic will change how art businesses will hire in the future and the core competencies they're looking for? If so, what skills do you think those would be, those new skills?
I mean, I think this question extends far beyond just art and art logistics. I mean, I graduated college in 2007, was looking for my first job in 2008, which was essentially
not a great
similar to the economy, which was not fun, and it took me a while to find a job. So I think the first thing is, don't think about it just within art logistics, and also don't take it personally about yourself, because it's just generally a difficult job market. I think it's a great time to be entrepreneurial and look for problems that are not being solved, whether it's pre-COVID or because of COVID, and look towards trying to solve them. I have faith that the world will get back to normal, but I mean, in the U.S. alone, there's millions and millions of people, and unemployment is at the highest it's been in quite some time. So generally, independent of what we're talking about, it's a difficult time. I think it's easier. Any job you can get, would go for it, but don't overlook trying to start something up on your own. Being an entrepreneur, finding problems that exist, and trying to create solutions for them.
And also, I would say, I think a lot of larger companies and corporations are also going to be really interested in innovating over the next couple of years, and that I imagine a lot of them will start opening up more innovation arms, like we just heard about. I was reading about Hauser and Wirth and their art lab department, for example. I think some of them might have even been here tonight in this webinar, but just as an example, and I guess that some of the larger shippers are probably going to be, I imagine it's going to be a more competitive landscape. There's going to be some consolidation, some smaller shippers will be purchased by the bigger ones, and the bigger ones may have an appetite to open up kind of innovation departments. I know I mentioned Munich Re for insurance, and I'm speaking with their innovation department, and this is where it pays to kind of be entrepreneurial, but within the comfort of a corporate environment, essentially.
Yeah. And David Turkin says, I know for sure we and many of our peers and partners are in hiring mode. Fear not.
There you go. Good. Glad to hear that.
Awesome. That's a nice positive note to end things on.
Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to say thank you for everybody who came on. I know some people had to drop off at around the 1 p.m. EST mark, but we still have 143 people on. So thank you so much. And a big thank you to Adam for joining us and talking about all these really important issues that everyone's kind of trying to find solutions to and come up with ideas about, and you've been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for hosting. It was it's a bright spot in an otherwise uncertain time, so appreciate it, and nice to just engage and have some connection with everyone.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Yep.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, guys.
Everyone.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Mackenzie, can we go through the unanswered questions so that we can try and answer them online or something at some point?
Yeah, there was some doubles up as well in the chat to the questions, so I think some of them were answered in the chat.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate
Bye,
it.
Adam. Stay well.
Cheers, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye.
Bye.
And yeah, we'll see everybody next week, and we will go through the Q&A and the chat, see if we can pick up those last questions that didn't get
Definitely.
answered.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.